We're at collegeboard.org. Scroll down, click on SAT. Scroll down, practice tests. And we're going to do practice test 9. So click here, and we're going to do the third test, 25 minutes, 20 questions, page 36. So again, no calculator, and you have this list of formulas to use. So this is one of the more difficult number 1 problems that I've seen, but we can use substitution to solve this system. I might move this 2y over and plug this whole thing into the top equation for x. If I distribute, subtract 8, divide, I get that y is equal to 0. So I'll put that up here. 0. And if I plug that into the second equation, I get x equals 4. They want to know x plus y. 4 plus 0 is just 4. Number 2 requires distributing and combining like terms. So 2 times x squared is 2x squared. 2 times negative x is negative 2x. 3 times x squared, 3x squared. 3 times a negative x is negative 3x. I can combine my x squared terms. This gives me 5x squared. And I can combine my x terms. This gives me minus 5x. A is your best choice. So number 3 is written in standard form. We could convert this to slope-intercept form, and that would allow us to easily identify the slope and the intercept and answer this question. So first I'm going to add 3x to both sides, then I'm going to divide everything by 2. So here, my slope is 1.5, and my intercept is negative 2. That's my y-intercept. So it's not a negative slope, it's a positive slope. And my intercept is negative. That means D is the answer. Number 4, we're building a linear equation, and we have height, 15 feet, and constant rate of 8 feet per second. So for y equals mx plus b, our constant rate is going to go here for m, our starting value is going to go over here for b, and our height is going to be here for y. I guess seconds would be our x also. So in this case, we're going to say that h is equal to 8s plus 15, which means that A is correct. There's a variety of vocabulary you will see to identify the slope. Per is a good one, each, every, rate. Look for words like. So number 5, we see this $75 per hour plus a flat fee of $125. So if the electrician worked 2 hours longer on Miss Sanchez's than Mr. Rowland's job, how much more do they charge? Well, 2 additional hours would be 75 times 2, which is 150. C. Number 6 we can set up as a proportion. This degree in the middle is 100 degrees, this angle in the middle, which means this other angle must be 260 degrees. And this first arc length we know is 5 pi. So what is this other arc length? That's unknown. So we can set up our proportion as 100 is to 260, as 5 pi is to some unknown pi. And the pi's can just kind of cancel out if we wanted to, and then we'll figure that out in a moment. The most common mistake here would probably be to say 100 is to 360. That's the total circle. We want to compare it to 260. Since this is the non-calculated portion, I would think of it like this. 100 times what is 260? Well, times 2.6. It's about 2.5 times. So 2.5 times 5. Well, 5 times 2 would be 10. Another half of that would be about 12.5, which gives me my answer, B, 13 pi.
Ice cream spoon.
One way to think about number 7 is how many times does 160 go into 8 evenly? And the answer is none. It's going to be less than 1. The only choice that's less than 1 is the obvious answer. If you wanted to solve this algebraically, we would multiply both sides by x, and then we would divide both sides by 160. And if you think about 8 over 16 as 0.5, well then it's 160, so we move it over one more, and it's 0.05. For number 8, I'm going to distribute the 3 and the 5 and combine the like terms, and I end up with 2ax minus 15 is equal to 8x plus 10. And they tell me that no value of x satisfies the equation. And what that means is this 8x has to be equal to 2ax. So 2 times what is 8? And the answer is 4. So then if we subtracted 8x, for example, from both sides, we would get that negative 15 is equal to 10, which is a false statement, so there's no solution. 9 is a system of 3 equations graphed in the xy plane. How many solutions does the system have? So a solution for a system is a coordinate xy that exists on all 3 of the graphs. So this point right here is on this line, it's on this line, and it's on this parabola. It's on all 3. We have some points over here that are on 2 out of the 3, or down here rather, not this one, but that's not enough. So there's only one point that crosses all 3 graphs. The answer is B, 1. So in number 10, if I tried to take this part on the left and multiply or expand it out using the box method, I know that I have to get these various values that go in front of the exponents. The coefficients have to match up. So 5x squared times ax is going to be some number of x cubed. 5 times a has to equal 20. So what is a? Well, a has to be 4. So I'll replace that with a 4, and now I can write 20x cubed, which matches. And if I do the next one, 5x squared times 3 gives me 15x squared. And here I have 4x times a negative bx. So that's going to give me x squared. And what is 4 times a negative b? Well, if I take negative 4b, which is going to be the coefficient for x squared, and I add to that 15, that has to be equal to negative 9. So let's go ahead and subtract 15 from both sides, and then we can divide both sides by a negative 4. And we see that b is equal to 6. So if a is 4 and b is 6, the problem asks what is the value of a times b? 4 times 6 is 24. So it's C. So for 11, we could probably cross-multiply this and solve it, but we can also just plug in some of the values. There's only 3 possible numbers to plug in. 0, 2, 4, and negative 4, and see which ones work. So 4 are possible. So if I was to plug in a 0 everywhere, I get that 0 equals 0, so that number checks out. If I tried a 2, that's going to be a negative 2, which is not equal to 2. So 2 does not work. On the left, I get 4 over 1, which is just 4. On the right, I get 2 times 4, which is 8 divided by 2, so also 4. So 4 checks out. If I try negative 4 over negative 7 is not equal to negative 4 here on the right. So negative 4 does not work, which means B is my answer. So for number 12, we're trying to make an equivalent fraction. So since the denominator on the left is 2x plus 1, we can try to make that the same denominator on the right. So we can multiply 5 by another version of 1. And if we do so, remember that it's 5 over 1, and when you multiply straight across, this becomes the fraction 10x plus 5 over 2x plus 1, because I distribute the 5 to each of those values. So when I add these together, the 5 and the 1 give me 6 over 2x plus 1. D. Remember that to add a fraction, you have to have a common denominator, even if it's an algebraic expression like 2x plus 1. Number 13 is about this parabola. We want to figure out its function. So remember parent functions. Y equals x squared is a parabola. And for that one, we have a vertex of 0, 0. This parabola is 3 to the right and up 1. So let's perform a translation. For the x, we take the inverse. So instead of going plus 3, because we're going right 3, we'll put it in as x minus 3. And for the vertical translation of plus 1, you just put it in like this. So we know that from where the vertex is, which helps us to rule out B and D. The only difference here is this 4, which is a dilation. You could recognize that this is steeper than a traditional parabola, or a y equals x squared parabola, and just immediately choose A. But you could also plug in the coordinates, 4 and 5. For example, 4 minus 3 is 1. Square that, it's still 1. Times 4 is 4, plus 1 is 5. So it checks out. If you tried that with C, you would not get 5. So for 14, the solution set is where these two inequalities overlap. So I've traced over with blue the lines that represent y is greater than or equal to x plus 2. And what that means is our solutions have to be above this. And I'm looking at my options, and this one is above it, this one is not, this one is above it, this one is not. So then if I shade the other line red, because that inequality says less than or equal to, my solutions have to be below this. This one is, and this one is not. So the only one that gets 2 checks is choice B. For 15, we could square both sides and turn it into a quadratic and factor it and find the answers. All of that would work. But we can also just try -1 and 2 and see if these give us a correct answer, because there's only really 2 numbers here. So try it with -1, and this turns into the square root of 1 is equal to 1, which is true. So -1 works. I'll write that over on the side, and next we're going to plug in a 2. On the left, we end up with the square root of 4, which is 2, but on the right, we still have that -2, and that's not equal. So B is the answer. So number 16 is actually on the formula page. The volume of a right rectangular prism is just all the dimensions multiplied together, length times width times height. So here we have a length of 4, we have a width of 9, and we have a height of 10. So multiply them all together, you should get 360. And that's your answer. For 17, you could solve for x and then plug it back in to 2x plus 1, but I noticed what happens if you divide everything by 2. You get 2x plus 1 is equal to 2, and there is your answer in one step. 18, the figure above is the function f, and then they talk about the function g here, and they say what is the maximum value of the function g. So this is the closest thing we see to a composite function here. We're going to take f of x and then add 6 to it. So what's the maximum value here of f of x? Well, it's along this line here, which is at 2. So if we add 6 to that, our new maximum value is going to be 8. So here's triangle PQR with right angle Q. They're talking about the sine of r is equal to 4/5. So if we think of SOHCAHTOA, sine is equal to opposite over hypotenuse. So the opposite side is 4 and the hypotenuse is 5. Then when it comes to TOA, the tangent is equal to opposite over adjacent. So we're looking at whatever this is over this. And since this is a right triangle, we can use the Pythagorean Theorem to figure out that missing side length. And that's just 5 squared is equal to 4 squared plus x squared. And this is a common Pythagorean triple. You should know it. This is just 3. 16 plus 9 is 25. But if you didn't, you could solve from there and work it out by subtracting 16 from both sides, and you get that 9 is equal to x squared, and you can go from there. So since x is equal to 3, tangent of p is equal to 3 over 4. And that's your answer. And I suppose you could have used this Pythagorean Theorem formula if you didn't. 20, function f is shown above. Function g, which is not shown, is perpendicular and passes through this point. Well, if it's perpendicular, then the slopes are opposite reciprocals. So here it is passing through the point 1, 3. And my slope here, if I go down 2 and right 1, my slope is -2. That's my slope for f. So if I take the opposite reciprocal, my slope for the other one is going to be 1/2. That's the slope of g. So that'll look like this. As from one point to the next, you have to go up 1, right 2. They want to know what the value of g of 0 is. So if you plug in a 0, can you really tell from the graph? Well, I'm guessing 2.5. And it turns out that is the answer, 2.5. But you could figure it out more precisely using algebra. So if we plug into y equals mx plus b, everything we know, we choose this point and this slope. We're going to say that 3 is equal to 1/2 times 1 plus b. So 3 is equal to 1/2 plus b. And if we subtract 1/2, we can say that 2.5 is equal to b. If my y-intercept is 2.5, when I plug in a 0, that's what I get.